Hey, Ruth.
Oh,
Hey, Delmar.
making sure I use the right link and I came in on time. I did
Delmar, oh, sorry. I
no,
just want to ask Delmar real quick. How do you pronounce your last name? I think you're muted. You're muted.
It's Gillis.
Gillis? Okay, awesome.
Yes.
And then Ruth, is it George with the pronunciation of the S or just George?
it's just George because it's George. Because it's French.
Okay, Ruth George. Cool.
I wanted to make sure that you got my updated deck.
Yeah. So I didn't have time to combine both of them, but I think it's fine. I think I could just
Switch them.
switch over because I had planned on making you Amanda co-host too. So if you feel more comfortable sharing your screen, that I guess that could also be an option.
I mean, I prefer if we didn't share our screen just in case there's technical issues on our end, it just freezes and one of us could continue, but then we can't because.
Okay, I can share it then. That's fine.
Yeah, the updated deck had some new information in it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna just test it out. I believe since I opened the room, it's technically open for everyone. So, but I'm just gonna do some demos to see that the slides are working fine. I'm assuming you guys can see the presentation, right? Looks good.
Yep, we can see
No
it.
issues. Okay, awesome. Whew. Let me stop sharing now. My session. And then Ruth and Amanda, did you guys get the Google Slides link that I had on the agenda? I can chat it to you guys now. So no.
That you cut out for a second, Roxana. What was?
Oh, did I? Sorry. I said if you both received this link to the Google Slides that we'll use in the breakout rooms just to take notes. Did you guys receive that? It should be in the facilitator agenda, but I can also just send it to you guys directly right now. That's easier.
Hi, everyone.
If you don't mind resending, I will look for it now.
I'm just going to step away for a minute.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My speakers were out the other day, so I didn't, and my mic, just wanted to make sure.
Roxana, have you begun letting other folks into the room or?
I think it's automatic. People who
Oh,
have
okay.
the link should be able to join automatically.
Okay, well, I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask quickly if we should be utilizing the Google slides to present when we're in our breakout groups.
Yeah, so so for the breakout rooms, the facilitators will assign a note taker. So then that whoever you assigned, you can just drop it in the chat and tell them like to use that link. If they're unable to use Google for whatever reason because of work or, you know, restrictions, I would advise you to look for another volunteer. And then you can share your screen during the breakout room so that, you know, the slide is being displayed and then the other person's taking notes on the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when we come back into the larger group, I will share the Google Slides. That way the note taker can then just easily read through what they highlighted.
Thank you.
Mhm. Welcome, everyone. We will get started shortly at 2:30 or so. Lauren, can you confirm if the slides look good?
Yep, it's in the right view.
Okay, awesome. Alrighty, so it's 2:30. I'm going to get us started. Hopefully other people are able to join. But welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's workshop on preparing a resilient and inclusive energy efficiency workforce. I am Roxana Ayala, a research assistant with the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, also known as ACEEE. And I'll be one of your facilitators for today's workshop. Today I am joined with my colleagues, Lauren Ross and Brian Howard. So to start off our workshop, or to kick off our workshop, we wanted to start off with a small activity. We want to encourage everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. We would love to see and learn who is joining us on this lovely afternoon or morning, wherever you might find yourself. We ask that you state your name, the utility or organization that you're with, and just name a favorite fall activity that you like doing during the fall. I can get us started. I'm not going to put in the chat, but as I mentioned, my name is Roxana Ayala. I'm with ACEEE, and my new favorite fall activity is apple picking. Lauren and Brian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lauren Ross with ACEEE. I'm Senior Director of Policy. I've been at ACEEE now for almost 8 years, and for the last 6 or so years, I led our local policy program, which was basically our work with cities. Happy to join you all today and help lead this workshop. My favorite fall activity has to be taking the kids to the pumpkin patch. Cliche, but it is my favorite. Brian?
Thanks so much. My name is Brian Howard. I'm the Director of State Policy at ACEEE, which works on a number of our workforce initiatives. My favorite fall activity is after kids have gone to the pumpkin patch, helping them decorate and cut up their pumpkins. And then also in DC, for some reason, or at least the neighborhood that I live in DC, our squirrels are apparently underfed. And so I enjoy trying to keep squirrels at bay from eating the pumpkins before people have been actually able to see them.
Awesome. That all sounds like good things to add to my list of doing. But well, wonderful. Well, we're gonna move on now, but I encourage folks to continue to introduce themselves in the chat. Okay. So for this workshop, we have 3 objectives that we hope attendees explore throughout the workshop and apply to their local workforce development work when you leave. We hope that you all learned about equitable energy efficiency workforce development opportunities, that you all gain exposure to successful education and training programs, and that you identify tangible strategies for making the energy efficiency workforce more inclusive. So for today's agenda, we will hear from speakers from Elevate, Eversource, National Grid, and Greater Lawrence Technical High School. We will also have 2 group discussions throughout our workshop. And now I would like to go over a few housekeeping guidelines and then quickly move on to our first presenter, which will also be followed by Q&A. So all attendees should be in listening mode only. I encourage you all to please use the chat box to ask questions of the presenters. Facilitators will then share your questions with the presenters following the presentation. We ask that you please refrain from using the chat for any dialogue other than asking questions while the presenters are presenting. And we have a couple workshop guidelines that we would like for you all to consider. First, we will hope that you will be present during our workshop. I know that it can be tempting to multitask during Zoom calls, but I hope that you will focus on the presentation and breakout rooms at hand. I also would like to ask folks to keep confidences. You can say what you heard here and you can say who was here, but we ask that you not say what you heard from who. I want to encourage folks to be able to share openly and not be quoted elsewhere based on the conversation. Third, we value all voices. So if you're someone who is inclined to speak often, then I hope that you take this offer to let others speak up. And if you're someone who does intend to speak up, we love to hear from you more today. And lastly, we hope that you all contribute to our workshop objectives by speaking with your own experiences and respecting the perspectives of others. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished panels of speakers. Today, we will hear from Delmar Gillis, Amanda Formica, Ruth George, and Susan Alamo. We'll start with our first speaker, who is Delmar Gillis. Delmar is the Chief Operating Officer of Elevated, located in Chicago, Illinois. As part of the Elevate team, Mr. Gillis is responsible for implementing workforce development and project management processes in support of Elevate's Energy's growing portfolio of clean energy projects. Mr. Gillis currently leads Elevate's core operational functions and also supports business development, program design, project coordination, engineering support, and contract management for Elevate's diverse energy efficiency and growing renewable energy programs. Mr. Gillis plays a critical role in supporting Elevate's work in increasing contractor diversity and launching energy assistance, community solar, and smart grid programs for Illinois utility customers. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and give it over to Delmar.
Thank you very much. And it is indeed an honor to be here today to talk with all of you. I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the inequities in the energy efficiency workforce, and then some of the strategies that I and others have seen that may provide a pathway forward to some solutions. Once again, my name is Delmar Gillis. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Elevate, and we are a national organization that's based in Chicago. We work primarily to ensure that everyone has access to clean air, clean water, and clean energy, no matter who they are or where they live. Elevate has been focused for many years on equity, and that's been really a cornerstone of our organization. And so oftentimes you'll see us in areas where we're looking at equity, the climate conversation, and we've been very active participant both on the policy side as well as the implementation perspective, with a real focus on creating jobs and opportunities, especially in underserved communities. One of the reasons that I'm actually in this space was that Elevate does a lot of work on energy efficiency projects, and I was going out doing some site visits, and I was noticing that a lot of the workers on the jobs did not look like me. And just from that very foundation, started to ask questions around why and what kinds of things we need to be doing as an organization to model a lot of the behaviors and a lot of the things that we talked about. And from those conversations, other people were having similar discussions within the organization to diversify our contractor pool. We really started to see that there were some patterns that were forming as it related to contractors. And so before we can dive into some of the solutions, I just wanted to talk about some of the barriers. And I also encourage folks, because usually I'm more of one that likes to kind of do back and forth and chat, although I probably can't do that while speaking. I would like to see and hear what barriers you're identifying and seeing if some of the ones that I mentioned are consistent with yours. One of the first ones that I see a lot is just access to opportunities. And this can take many forms. In the form of a worker, it is not knowing about opportunities to work in the clean energy space. A lot of times job opportunities are very much within personal networks, or in instances with unions and other organized labor. Sometimes folks that are in the union will find, brothers, cousins, nieces, nephews, and acclimate them to the new opportunities. And so there's a general just lack of understanding around what the clean energy jobs are, especially as it relates to energy efficiency and also with a lot of the clean energy jobs that are out there. Another limiting factor is access to capital and funding. And this one probably touches more on the contractor side. In Illinois, a lot of the programs require you to do work and then you get reimbursed once the work is completed. And so a small Black or brown contractor may be able to engage in some project work, but then ultimately, the access to working capital will prevent that organization from even being able to grow. And honestly, what we're starting to see as well is that you need to be of a certain size to do a certain volume of work to be cost effective. I.e., if you're just doing 1 or 2 projects every other month, you literally your business cannot pencil out in the black. And so there is both a capital funding issue as well as a ability to create the margins that you need in order to make your business work. A third barrier that I've seen a lot of is limited access to training, certification, and development opportunities. And once again, that one can take many forms. Oftentimes, when people are able to sign on with larger organizations, they're able to get additional training and the additional certifications that are required to grow in that industry. But oftentimes when you're looking at, say, an underserved community, getting access to the training is a challenge. But then also, if we take a step back, even if someone can access the training, there's an opportunity cost for being in a training program. I.e., if you're in let's say a 6-week training program on how to become like a BPI certified energy analyst, are you missing another job? Are you able to get childcare for those periods of time, et cetera? And so the actual process of training, certification, and development opportunities can become a challenge. And then the last one that I wanted to mention, and I realize that there's probably many, many more, and once again, feel free to put them in the chat, is limited access to in-process tools and resources, such as back office support. And this, once again, is really connected with the contractor side of the house. And it's tied to the capital issue I mentioned previously, where if you are a Black or brown business, let's say, that really wants to grow in energy efficiency, do you have the skill set and the support resources that you need? A lot of the businesses that we see are really good at going in and doing the energy work in a building or in a home, but then who's doing the invoicing and the accounting and handling the permitting and all of the things that are required there, not to mention all of the utility paperwork and reporting. And so you've created a situation where you have a very able-bodied, very eager business owner that wants to grow in a space, but they have a plethora of barriers. And the unfortunate side of this story is that a lot of times these businesses have multiple barriers. So it's not that you pick one of the 4 or 5 that I went over, it's they may be compounded by limited access to capital, limited access to workers, limited access to training, et cetera. And so part of what we have to do as we look at these challenges is to not look at them as kind of one-offs, but look at them in aggregate and come up with solutions that can address the aggregate need around the barriers that have been created, especially in this new economy that is going to be built foundationally on energy efficiency. One of the things that I do quite a bit at Elevate is I focus a lot on renewables. And one of the things that is readily apparent in the renewable space is you don't want to put solar panels on an old roof. You can't do a lot of the renewable work unless the safety, health and safety, maintenance, deferred maintenance work is done. And then before you go on to the renewables, you also should do the energy efficiency work before you then get into the renewables. And so part of, as I've been kind of thinking through this, solutions that I've seen have been very holistic and not just focused on, say, solving the energy efficiency program as a standalone, but looks at solving this from a broader perspective, looking at either the quote unquote whole home or whole community-based solutions where you're looking broader than just solving one particular aspect. So one of the areas I wanted to touch on, and a question that I kind of put out there, and I'm really interested once again in people's thoughts and ideas, is the question around how local, state, and national policy can influence energy efficiency program outcomes and address inequities. And in some ways that seems like a very kind of straightforward question, but when you start to look at some of the dynamics that are at play, it quickly becomes very complicated. So I'm going to touch on just some of the pieces of that, and then I'm going to kind of transition into a discussion around the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act here in Illinois and how it looked to kind of address some of the issues that I've kind of laid out. So why don't we start first with some of the federal policy considerations. And once again, I'm not going to go too deep into this. I am not a federal policy expert, but I feel like I kind of know enough to be dangerous, being that I work at the state level quite a bit. And a couple of things that I've seen that have a significant impact. And the first one I give may be a little bit of a surprise to the group, but I think we can't have this conversation without talking about COVID-19 and the disproportionate impact that it's had on communities of color, especially. And one of the impacts of COVID-19 is directly connected to the PPP loans and the whole process around accessing the PPP loans. And from a policy perspective, the PPP loans have been great for a lot of small businesses to keep them sustained, to keep them in buildings, working on energy efficiency work. But one of the challenges that we've seen is one of the barriers that I talk about frequently is the barrier of entry. So the initial process of completing the application, of having all of the paperwork, to pulling all of the payroll records, many of which the businesses don't have. They also have challenges with their workers. Many small businesses don't have the level of workers. And so one of the solutions that is at play nationally that has both some positives and some opportunities is around PPP loans and making sure that funding actually gets to the participants. Also on the federal side, I'm sure all of us as environmentalists, as folks that are very focused in on energy efficiency, are closely tracking the infrastructure bill as well as the reconciliation bill and the conversations that are taking place with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and both House and Senate leadership. I think that is going to be a very important piece of this conversation as we start to look at solutions, is what components are going to be federal and what pieces of the solution are we going to be able to bring to bear at the local level to address these needs. At the state level, once again, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act is doing here in Illinois as an example of kind of a statewide approach. But then also from a local perspective, we don't want to lose sight of the local angle on this. And the thing that I would say that is important locally, I was actually on a call this morning and somebody said something that really resonated with me, which is to make sure that communities are assets and part of the change management solution, not that change is being done to them. And I think the thing that I want to really emphasize from a local perspective is being able to connect the dots with communities, because a lot of times where things get disconnected locally are two areas. One is the barrier to access solutions and being able to access those solutions, especially for underserved contractors and workers. But then the other thing is that oftentimes energy efficiency is done to people or renewables are done to a community. And the conversation is in a place where it needs to start to shift to listening to the communities and finding ways of engaging them. Because many of the barriers, say, that you or I may see may be totally different barriers at the community level, and engaging them in the innovation and the solutions is important.
Omar, I don't mean to interrupt, but we have a minute left on the presentation.
Yes, and I just wanted to touch on CEJA very briefly, and then I'll call it a wrap. What we have tried to do with the CEJA legislation is to address all of these topics. And so part of what we've done at the state level is we did listening tours where we listened, we understood what was going on at the community level. We created a system of incentives to support the contractors. So there are programs to train around prime contractors and also incubator programs for new subcontractors. We also created a system of workforce hubs that provide and address barriers specifically. So work clothes, tools, travel stipends, clothes, etc. So that when people miss work, they can get trained on how to, say, be at HVAC repair person or installer. They get paid to go through the training, and then they can align themselves with a job. And then they're then able to also take advantage of the placement services that are provided. So that's kind of a really high level overview, just kind of once again touching on some of the barriers, some of the state, local, and national solutions, and then touching on a solution that the state of Illinois did at the state level. But once again, I'll just wrap by saying this is the key to addressing barriers, especially related to workforce and contractor development, are really around engagement, building relationships, building trust, and then designing programs that address the barriers head on.
Great. Thank you so much, Delmar, for your presentation. Now I'd like to open it up for Q&A for a couple minutes. I encourage folks to come off mute and ask your question or share your question to Delmar, or share some of the barriers that you might have seen in your community with Delmar as well. If not, feel free to put your question in the chat and I can relay that to Delmar.
Yes. So I see a couple in there. If you'd like me to, I can quickly go through and answer those.
Yeah.
One is, in addition to the barriers that you went over, we also see transportation as a barrier for workers, and relatedly that training programs and job opportunities are disproportionately not located near Black and Brown majority communities. This is a great question, and this is a key barrier that needs to be addressed. I can say one of the things that we did in Illinois was that we created a hub system where we basically identified environmental justice communities across the state. And then we put the training facilities in those neighborhoods and then included travel stipends for those that may have some transportation limitations. We also were careful to map those locations based on public transportation and other transportation channels that are typically used by underserved communities. So that's just a really quick solution. Do you have a link detailing the incentives for contractors under CEJA? Yes, I will put that in the chat once I wrap up, but we do have a pretty exhaustive list of the programs and that are set up specifically for workers and contractors. Once again, in our legislation, it does split it between energy efficiency and renewables. So you may see that when you go through that. The next one is, can you go into more detail on how you are funding the programming that you mentioned? Yes, in Illinois specifically, many of the programs that are part of what's called the Energy Transition Fund are funded through the state as part of the utility bill. The overall cost for the programs that I mentioned, plus a lot more, including like additional seed capital, et cetera, is roughly about $3.50 on the customer utility bill. Let's see. I think that covers most of the questions. If anyone has any other questions, I'm definitely happy to answer them. I do appreciate the opportunity and the time to talk through barriers and some of the potential solutions that are out there. And if I see more questions in the chat, I'm happy to kind of go through and answer those as we go through.
Great. Thank you so much, Delmar. And as you mentioned, if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them on the chat for Delmar. But thanks for everyone who's asked questions. We will now conclude the Q&A and pivot to a different portion of the agenda. I'm going to share my screen again real quick. Okay, so Lauren.
Great. Thanks, Roxana, and thanks, Delmar, for that great introduction to the topic, and was super helpful for thinking through many of these issues. Somewhat as a follow-on to Delmar's discussion, or level set discussion, I should say. we now want to introduce a reflection activity that we'll ask you to do individually and then discuss in small groups. The idea is for you all to think about what inequities you see in your own work, and how do you hope to make the energy efficiency workforce more equitable and inclusive. When we use words like equitable or inclusive, they can mean different things to different folks, and we'll use this reflection activity to talk through of, how we're all approaching this issue. And then lastly, we're asking that you think through questions that you have on building a more inclusive energy efficiency workforce through your own efforts. And so to begin, we're going to give you all about 3 minutes. Just we'll sit in silence, let you jot down some of your thoughts. And then Roxana will send us all to small groups. Roxana, how large will our groups be? Or I should say, how small will they be?
They'll be compromised or consisting of 6 people per group.
Okay. And then you'll have about 7 or so minutes in those those smaller groups to talk through your responses to these questions. We'll come back, we'll do a brief report out so you can, share with others what you heard in your groups. So you should all be thinking individually now. You have about 3 minutes. And Roxana, to be clear, there's no facilitator in these small groups and that folks should just feel comfortable starting to discuss these questions?
Yeah, so there won't be any facilitators or note takers, just really informal discussion to see what others responses. So we'll have about 1 more minute and then I will open the breakout room. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open up the breakout room. So we'll return up in like about 5 minutes. So around 3:04, 3:05, where Lauren will facilitate a share out group discussion. So. Hey folks, for those of you who just joined us, we are now just doing a small breakout activity, but we will resume in the large group in a few minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. And probably like our group, you were cut short at some point. That time flew by. And so we have about 5 or so minutes set aside for share out from these calls. I encourage you to speak about some themes that resonated from the report outs from others in your group, or yourself if you didn't get a chance to speak in your group too. Feel free to just jump in. So I just want to stop talking and open the floor.
I'd like to just take 20 seconds if I could and say that there's been an exciting development in California around a tariff on bill, pay as you save type model for electrification and energy efficiency improvements. And there's a report that's accessible at the Building Decarbonization Coalition website called Toward an Accessible Finance Solution. And the notion is that if we can use accurately modeled and predicted energy savings as loan security, we don't have to qualify an LMI household to sign up for a loan, and we can bridge the split incentive gap and get private investment investing in energy efficiency improvements. And where the ROI is highest happens to also coincide with where maintenance has been deferred the most. So the buildings that produce the highest post-electrification return on investment will, this has to be analyzed climate zone by climate zone. There's a software-based solution for this. But the buildings that are most likely to get qualified are the ones where there's the most deferred maintenance. So it tends to align very well with equity, and it attracts 50 times the investment that you bring in private capital investment to the tune of billions of dollars, and you're not limited to the small pools of money that are available through ratepayer and taxpayer dollars. So it just broadens the finance picture way beyond what incentives could ever do. That's my 30 seconds.
Anyone else want to speak to the inequities they're seeing from where they sit in terms of how it relates to the efficiency workforce?
I will say, Bruce, there was some interest in knowing if you would be able to share the link to the report you mentioned in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
And I'll say in our group, and just to get you all, thinking and how you want to respond, we've talked about a, persistence of women and people of color underrepresented in this workforce. That is where I think each of our respondents, first started speaking, and then also how that relates to who's actually served by programs and has direct implications to the reach of programs. I thought that was an interesting, an important connection to highlight from the beginning. I was happy to hear that. And let me again just open it up. Anyone else want to just express any insights they heard or are thinking at this point?
Lauren, this is Delmar. I wanted to speak to one of Ed's questions, because this is a question you kind of hear a lot about: how do you better engage, like, say, BIPOC groups or groups with women in the broader policy discussion? And I just wanted to comment that that's typically a process that involves engaging with groups at the community level, doing a lot of listening, and then understanding where their priorities are. And then over time, building relationships and then building trust will ultimately lead to a higher level of engagement. Unfortunately, because those groups are usually pretty busy, it's hard to just reach out to them and get immediate engagement.
That's a great point. And I'm sure something that should hopefully be reinforced throughout today's conversation. Relationship building takes a lot of time. But once you spend the time, it's the idea of the slingshot, right? You take a step, you build the relationships, it takes time, and then you can propel forward in this work, or at least how I like to see it. Anyone else want to share anything?
Yep, we have time for one more, Cheryl. If not, that's okay too. We will, well, thank you all for sharing. And for those who also shared in the chat, we will now move on to our next presentation. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay. So our next speakers are Amanda, Ruth, and Susan. They will speak on Massachusetts Clean Energy Pathways Program. But first, I'd like to introduce each speaker. As I mentioned, we will hear from Amanda Formica, who works on the Massachusetts Customer Energy Management Team at National Grid, where she focuses on residential energy efficiency program strategy related to income eligible customers, new construction, workforce development, and partnerships with municipalities and community-based organizations, and issues of equity. Her background is in stakeholder engagement, strategy, community development, and climate, energy, and transportation policy. We will also hear from Ruth, who is the supervisors of equity, strategic partnership, and workforce development for Eversource. And in her role, she utilizes procedural, distributional, and structural equity to expand access to energy efficiency programs in the workforce. Ruth previously served as a neighborhood and ethnic liaison to Mayor Walsh and as a manager of engagement and outreach of the Department of Youth Engagement and Employment for the City of Boston. And lastly, we will hear from Susan Almo, who is the coordinator of grants, workforce development, and after school and evening career technical education programs at Greater Lawrence Technical Schools. Her current focus is developing job training programs that prepare underserved populations for clean energy and energy efficiency career pathways. Susan's background is in residential construction, environmental justice, and community organizing through programs and initiatives based in the United States, Latin America, India, and Africa. And so let's see. Ruth, Amanda, and Susan, whenever you guys are ready.
Good afternoon, not morning. Ooh. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. I think we can go to the first slide. I don't know if it's set up as of yet, but again, introduce myself, Ruth George. I am with Eversource and serve as the Supervisor of Equity, Workforce Development, and Strategic Partnership. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Amanda Formica, who will introduce herself.
Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure you guys see the presentation, right?
So we see it in, it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Ruth. Amanda, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. Amanda Formica here from National Grid. I work in Massachusetts on our energy efficiency strategy program, the customer energy management team. And as we go over to the agenda, you'll kind of see an overview of what we're going to be, the three of us are going to be talking about over the next several minutes. We're hoping to have an engaged discussion with you all, building on Delmar's presentation about the energy efficiency workforce. You're going to learn a bit about the research that we've used to inform this presentation and the workforce development initiatives that we're working on across Massachusetts. You'll hear about the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to workforce development. And get to hear a case study on how the Mass Save Clean Energy Pathway Program is engaging a more diverse and intergenerational workforce that is place-based and including local partners. And we hope that you find this informative and that it sparks some creative thinking around your own workforce development programming. And we're looking forward to some discussion afterwards. So going to the next slide. There are 6 electric and gas utilities and municipal aggregators in Massachusetts that together administer energy efficiency programs. Those include both National Grid and Eversource and 4 other colleague companies. As when we form Mass Save with the common goal of helping residents and businesses across Massachusetts save money and energy. Next slide. And then next slide. So first, we're going to dive into a bit of the research that informs our work. So with help from BW Research in early 2020, that was in the winter of 2019, just before the pandemic started, we completed a Massachusetts Energy Efficiency Workforce Development Needs Assessment. That is available online, so we can share the link afterwards. Among the many data points that were included in the assessment is demographic information about the energy efficiency workforce in our state. And these statistics illustrate that the EE workforce in Massachusetts is generally whiter, more male dominated, and more primarily English speaking than the general population in Massachusetts. Although there is a good amount of variability across the different job types that we looked at. We looked at 8 different job areas. And an important related finding to inform workforce demographics revealed that 45% of employers, so nearly half of the EE employers, have no formal diversity and inclusion or affirmative action programs. So this means that there's not enough prioritization or a formal process in place to really reach racially and ethnically diverse recruits into the energy efficiency industry broadly. And the lack of this kind of process contributes to creating gaps in participation in the workforce from diverse populations and really minimizes the value of having a diverse workforce that reflects our communities. In addition, the data also showed that women are significantly underrepresented in the workforce, which poses a challenge because you want women to be able to see themselves. The same goes with people of color, to be able to see ourselves in the energy efficiency roles in order to be interested in them in the first place in some cases. And then lastly, similar to roles of the role of gender, the role that gender and race plays, we're seeing that 90% of the workforce is primarily speaks English. And in that case, we lose out on the opportunity to provide a proper level of service to our multilingual customers around the state. Next slide. So this same research showed that 92% of employers reported hiring difficulty over the previous 12 months, with 45% indicating that hiring had been challenging. So this study, as I mentioned, was completed just before the pandemic began, and certainly a lot of that challenge has become compounded, of course, since then. And it's been, in many cases, even harder to hire workers back. So, but from the survey, from the research we had, some of this was due to lack of experience or industry-specific knowledge, low level of awareness of career opportunities, and a small applicant pool. And also, we heard that nearly half of the potential workers who were surveyed were not interested in energy efficiency, and less than half indicated that they thought that there are that these jobs in our industry provide a good salary. And we know that that's not the case. They, in fact, many of them provide good salaries and good benefits. So at the same time, we also found that while entry-level hourly wages for some energy efficiency trades tend to be on the low side, the growth opportunity and potential benefits and access to bonuses is really quite high. And then the lack of competitive salaries in the lower wage level job types does impact retention in the workforce, particularly in certain trades like weatherization installers, where we're having a lot of difficulty in Massachusetts. The most difficult occupations to fill include plumbers, HVAC workers, and insulation/weatherization workers. And I think the challenge around these really speaks to the need for more hands-on training opportunities for candidates, where they can gain some real-world experience, as well as the need for more partnerships with training entities to connect potential candidates with jobs. So we really believe that a shift in mindset and increased investment in the workforce is necessary to change these statistics from our current circumstances. Next slide. So overall, the workforce development needs assessment recommended that affordable training and education close to home can really positively impact the workforce. And this has resonated in subsequent surveys that we've undertaken with our contractor base as well. There's definitely a growing need to address language barriers and raise awareness of the opportunities and benefits of energy efficiency careers, particularly in Commonwealth of Massachusetts designated environmental justice communities, and to immigrant and first generation populations through career guidance, mentorship, and business connections. And this also includes internship opportunities and job placement to increase hands-on experience and exposure to the energy efficiency industry, because even as technologies change, experience is still crucial for success in the workforce. And then finally, our research has indicated that employers believe that classroom learning tends to be less valuable than experiential learning. And the lack of experiential kind of hands-on experience is the most, or was the most significantly reported reason for hiring difficulty. And 85% of the employers require some kind of previous work experience. It can be up to 3 years of experience in a comparable position. Sometimes it can be much less, but it's really about how do we, and then there are certain career tracks or job tracks where they don't necessarily need industry related experience, but they need some kind of sales or other experience. So how do we identify those individuals in the first place and help them get that hands-on experience? I'll hand it over to Ruth next.
Next slide. Thanks, Amanda. So to this point, I think this is one of the reasons that Amanda and I really wanted to speak to the value of diversity and inclusion and equity in the workforce. Next slide, please. So where we are now, we can no longer wait to diversify the workforce, as the workforce has already become increasingly intergenerational. According to an article published by Built-In, in 2020, the minority population increased in the workforce from 37% workforce to 35% 7%, and that's 19% higher since 1980. And 44% of this population classified themselves as millennials. And by 2025, millennials will make up 75% of the workforce. And that is due to of course, the boomers that are retiring. So you have a good population of the workforce overall that's just into retirement, and this is increasing the space for particular populations to really find an opportunity to engage successfully in the workforce. It's also important to note that by 2065, that we may feel like it's so far away, but for some it's not. There will not we won't have any single ethnic or racial majority, and that's a fact that we have to underscore, as it means racially and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to perform better than their competitors, and this is due to the increased access to talent at diverse companies, and diverse companies that are really investing in standing up diversity and inclusion programs around workforce are seeing are better positioned and are seeing a 70% increase in their ability to capture new markets. Overall, companies that prioritize diversity create diverse strategies to engage the workforce, become more inclusive and more innovative around the solutions in which they create, as the workforce reflects the populations and the communities that they service. Next slide. The workforce has changed, and diverse companies, they're winning. It's important that we understand that the social climate impact of being diverse, the social climate impacts diversity, but it's not just the social climate of diversity, it's also financial. Diverse companies are 1.7 times more innovative. They experience significant higher cash flow, 2.3 times more they're 2.3 more times to see a cash flow per employee. They're 120% more likely to reach financial goals, and 83% in and they have an increase of 83% in productivity due to the large population of millennials in the workforce, who often are focused on efficiency, sustainability, and technology when they're producing their work. So they often produce it faster and at a different quality. It's important to note that a lot of this is around innovation, and 43% of the diverse, and this speaks to the role of leadership in diversity in the workforce. 43% of diverse boards notice a higher profit as they're able to create inclusive strategies to incorporate diverse experiences that their board members bring to the work. Equally, as important, increased in gender representation that Amanda spoke to earlier in the workforce through diverse executive teams can be also quite fruitful for corporations, as they'll see a 21% increase in outperforming profitability and 27% overall increase in value creation. And so I think overall what this speaks to like, the importance of having a diversity and inclusion plan around workforce development that's intentionally designed to represent the populations that you service, not just in the people that are field doing the work, but also part of your leadership and your strategic and implementation teams. Next slide, please. So this is an additional study that we wanted to share. These findings here, I think, are incredibly important, that were recently released by E for the Future and BW Research as a job analysis in 2021. And within their study, it overviews the current infrastructure of energy efficiency, specifically in Massachusetts, and how many homes are due for energy efficiency upgrades. As you can see, it's over 2 million. And 100% of our counties do have energy efficiency individuals that work in the sector. But even within that, there's so much more that we can do to reach diverse populations to engage in our workforce. As you can see, the demographic information, as an update to what Amanda shared earlier, it's still highly populated within a certain segment of individuals, and it's not inclusive of all of the populations that are serviced through energy efficiency. And within that workforce in Massachusetts alone, we have over 76,000 jobs that are within the energy efficiency sector. And through that, And through that, we really have to think creatively around how do we work with some of these smaller businesses that have, 70% have 19 or less employees, around what it means to work with diverse populations and the communities that they service through our energy efficiency programs. And so, next slide, please. We wanted to just share that so we can kind of segue why we've modeled the Clean Energy Pathway Program after reviewing the data and evaluation around what the needs of the workforce are. Next slide. Thank you. So the Clean Energy Pathways Program is a program that is sponsored by Mass Save, which are the utility providers that are here. And it's a new initiative that we actually launched in 2020, the end of 2020, and placed our young adults in 2021. The Clean Energy Program is focused on increasing access to diversity in the workforce to better reflect the communities that, as Mass Save, we service, and especially focused on the BIPOC population and environmental justice communities. Next slide. The objective of the program is to help grow and diversify the workforce by attracting young adults from different backgrounds and from underrepresented communities, specifically around EJ communities, into entry-level, high-growth energy efficiency roles with the goal of creating a pathway for those individuals into full-time employment. The goals within the program are create a sustainable pipeline of qualified weatherization and HVAC workers. Currently, those are the two tracks that we are focused on, generating career opportunities for those historically not represented in the program. And of course, as I mentioned before, diversifying the workforce, but boosting energy efficiency program participation rates. We see this as a two-prong approach. We want to increase diversity in the workforce, but we also want to increase the knowledge gap that exists around certain populations understanding energy efficiency. So if we can increase the population of these individuals in the workforce, the goal is that they'll take this information, this knowledge back to their communities to normalize access to energy efficiency. I always share this story because I think it's a good way of looking at it. If an individual is lower income and they have never been in a family that owned, and if they've been renting their entire life, they're least likely to understand what energy efficiency is. If they go to a school that is lower income and the school is struggling with resources and services, they're probably likely not have a large utility company that came and connected them with energy efficiency education programs. And so with those things, they create barriers for these individuals to understand how to engage in clean energy, especially and specifically even more its workforce. So we're hoping that this creates a pathway, and through that we provide paid training and hands-on experience in the industry for our weatherization and HVAC, and we are currently working on standing up a third pathway. This is a 9-month fully paid internship that is paid at $17 an hour. And through that, the individuals receive valuable skills, ongoing support, mentorship, job placement assistance, with the goal of seeing 100% of the interns placed in jobs. This opportunity during the internship, in addition to with the job placement, when we were selecting employers, we only selected employers for this program that were interested in hiring individuals full-time. We found that we believe that has to be the key in this process. Having internships and job placement, internship opportunities where individuals receive hands-on experience, but the employer is not looking to hire, makes it creates more of a challenge to actually retain these individuals in the workforce. Next slide, please. So the program focus areas is serves to engage and deploy women, people of color, first generation. I think we mentioned this, between the ages of 18 and 25. We intentionally selected this age range just because of the type of work that they're going to be doing. Especially with installation, you're going into small spaces, you're going into parts of a home that someone who is probably older, it's going to be much more difficult to do. We also identified that through the data with the individuals that, we're in energy efficiency we're in installation, doing weatherization for a short period of time, and then they pathway into something else. So we wanted to make sure that we identified individuals that were so able-bodied that also could be retained in the workspace for a considerable period of time. I know the slide cuts off at the very end, at the bottom there. Outside of weatherization specialists and HVAC specialists, we're looking to also pathway energy auditors, specifically those who are bilingual. We heard from our external stakeholders that when you have an energy auditor specialist that is in your home and you're speaking to a family that is bilingual, it is difficult for them to understand what the individual is saying in English, because this work is so technical that having someone that is bilingual that speaks their native language goes a long way in them trying to unpack the process of weatherizing their homes. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits of the energy of some of the benefits of this program for individuals who participate in it is the professional development skills that they receive. This program provides, like we mentioned, wraparound services and resources. So in addition to placing them through training that we pay for outside of the HVAC, we also, outside the training and paying for them to be placed in the roles, we provide professional development in the form of mentorship and workshops that are focused on upskilling and improving their ability to pathway into other opportunities in the industry. Case management support from the community-based organizations. So if there are challenges in services and resources that they need that are outside of the compounds of the program, that we are connected with an organization that can support them with that. Hands-on experience within the field itself. A lot of our employers have said, honestly, if they can come in and they can do the work, we want to keep them because we have a shortage of individuals in this field. And of course, job placement that we're hoping to see 100% individuals be placed. In addition to access to a large clean energy network to further their career growth. And I know I mentioned mentorship and retention in the industry, and overall just a deeper understanding of energy efficiency profession. Recently, we had one of our interns who was on a workforce professional development workshop, just communicating his experience. And he mentioned how he had never thought about a home in this space, that he hadn't thought about the energy use in a home, the type of lighting, the appliances, and how all that impacted their cost of energy. And now that he's going into individuals' homes, it's giving him a whole different insight on how to have a more energy efficient home. And honestly, that is a big part of what we're trying to do here, is to, of course, create more space in the workforce for diverse individuals, but to also educate and give them access to a whole network of resources and opportunities that they initially were not aware or exposed to. Next slide. So the internship program model in general, this is just an overview of what it entails. It is a program that is sponsored by Mass State administrators, and that's the utility companies with Eversource, National Grid, and tons of the other sponsors that we have. Are incorporated within this program. And through that, we sponsor this program through what we administer through a lead vendor. This lead vendor focuses on program management, implementation, the day-to-day responsibilities of the program, and under the leadership of Mass Save, they work directly with our community-based organizations to recruit, do background checks, interview, work readiness, training, referrals, and we pay our community-based organizations to be involved in this. We do that intentionally because, to the point that Tamar mentioned earlier, these organizations have other responsibilities and have other missions that may not align with energy efficiency, and they're also learning what energy efficiency is for some of these community-based workforce development organizations. So we pay them for their time, as they will spend quite a bit of time supporting us in retaining individuals in the industry. We also have, as a part of this, our training providers that provide safety and technical and certification testing and so much more, and preparing these young adults to go into the workforce. And we work with our, sorry, something's on my screen here. We also work with our employment partners to place these to interview and place these individuals in these internships. We also survey and request information from our the business partners to state, who's doing, like, how well did these young adults do in the interviews, if we need to better prepare them through training agencies or the community-based organization. This is very much a program that is being informed actively from the different external partners to inform the development of the program, so we can retain young adults in the program, and of course the participants, which are student, they're entry level, and we specifically also look for individuals that are interested in transferring into a new industry, individuals who don't have necessarily a lot of work experience. We have, from what we see, a lot of individuals that are in the program that are bilingual, that are considered people of color, that are also female. So it's great to see that the program model that we've set up, we have been able to attract talent. And now, we're really working through this first initial group of cohort to think through strategic strategies to retain them in the industry. And we do think the exposure through mentorship and continued professional development their entire 9 months will help them sustain that.
So on this slide on the left, you can see the timeline that we're using. This is for each cohort. Each cohort, we currently have 12 participants who have their internships, and we're looking to place an additional 120 interns over the next 3 years. And each cohort is designed to have approximately 20 participants for 9 months. And the 9 months is really with the emphasis on the hands-on experience that we talked about earlier, as far as the importance that came out with that in our research, in order to set up the participants to be really competitive in the workforce and transition into the full-time jobs, ideally with the same companies where they are interning. So everything begins with 2 weeks of training. Those are for our weatherization workers. And then for our HVAC interns, they're coming directly out of high school level HVAC programs. Then there's 3 months of hands-on training with mentorship, and followed by 6 months of internship and continued professional development experience. So we have 1 to 2 times a month of professional development programming, or PDP. We also understood that we needed to build a budget that reflects the needs of the population that we are trying to reach. So it's a really robust program. I'm kind of thinking of Delmar's presentation of really trying to provide all of the wraparound services and support. And Susan, I think, is going to touch on that in a couple minutes. So to this end, we've invested, this is per cohort, there's about a $20,000 investment in each participant. And we have our lead, our implementation vendor, who's providing program development support. And then the $20,000 represents support that they're getting from a place-based community organization, from the funding for the internship itself, and for the training that we're providing. And over the next 3 years, we're planning to invest $3.6 million in this particular program to increase access to diversity in the workforce. And the next slide, really our last slide, before we transition over to Susan, is an overview of other workforce development enhancements that we're planning over the next 3 years. And I keep talking about 2022 to 24 because later next week, we're going to be filing our 2022 to 24 energy efficiency plan with our state regulator. And including the Clean Energy Pathways program, it includes nearly $50 million of commitment that we are making as program administrators in the energy efficiency workforce over the next few years, with diversity, equity, inclusion, and electrification together at the center of all of our efforts. That $50 million includes $36 million in investment with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center for clean energy workforce development in environmental justice communities. That's part of the Massachusetts Climate Act of 2021. And then aside from the Clean Energy Pathways program, we're also planning to invest nearly $1 million over the next 3 years in scholarships that are going to be supporting energy efficiency training and certifications for candidates who are living in environmental justice communities. We're also planning targeted outreach and training to bring more diverse business enterprises into the energy efficiency program service delivery ecosystem, and some evaluation research to help us understand kind of what the potential market is of businesses and who we're already investing in, who are diverse business enterprises, to help us improve our work. And in aggregate, our workforce development programs directly sponsored by program administrators are we're planning to reach over 12,000 energy efficiency professionals over the next 3 years, which we're really excited about. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan Almano, who's going to talk about her work at Greater Lawrence Technical High School, who is one of our amazing partners in implementing the Clean Energy Pathways program. And we really couldn't do it without partners like Greater Lawrence Tech. So I'm glad that Susan can talk about the power of partnerships.
So next slide, please. Right, so let me introduce myself again. I'm Susan Almano, and I'm in charge of workforce development at Greater Lawrence Technical School. And mostly I'm going to talk about our role in the Clean Energy Pathway internship program. But I also first wanted to tell you a little bit about Greater Lawrence Technical School. And I think that it's really important because this is a way for those of you who are in utilities or in other businesses or organizations to learn about how technical schools can really be of assistance in realizing your diverse workforce development goals. So Greater Lawrence Technical School, or GLTS as we call ourselves, we are a public high school. That's our main role. And we have 1,600 high school students, and they study in 19 different technical areas here in our school. And that includes things like HVAC, carpentry, plumbing, electrical. We also do workforce development with the adult population. We have funding from something called the Career Technical Initiative here in the state of Massachusetts to offer opportunities for technical training to unemployed and underemployed adults, in helping them achieve employment in career pathway jobs. And so we do have that kind of opportunities as well in the construction trades, but as well in the healthcare industry and in advanced manufacturing, welding, and metal fabrication. And with all of that work we're doing, we're also in the midst of strategic planning right now. And one of the things we're looking at is how we can reorient all of our technical areas to really be focused on preparing adult students and high school students for our clean energy jobs that are coming in the future, to be sure that we are not just preparing for present day jobs in the trades or in any of our technical areas, but we're really we're driven by what's coming and the future of jobs. So saying that kind of says why we're a good partner for the CEP internship program. But I should also mention that our technical school, as all technical schools, we have sending school districts. And 2 of our sending school districts are environmental justice communities, or portions of their communities are EJ communities. And that's Lawrence, Massachusetts, and Methuen, Massachusetts. And Lawrence in particular is our biggest sending community. And it is a majority Black and Brown community, specifically Latinx. And it is a community that's an immigrant community striving to look for new areas and better employment opportunities. And so we really did want to be part of this. So kind of talking about what our role is in the CEP internship program. Our first role really is being a community connection. And in our case, our interns are in the HVAC. And so we had already trained them through our high school program and through our adult program. So they already had their technical training, but nonetheless, attracting them to this program was an issue of going out and talking with them, working with them, recruiting them to really understand or begin thinking about working in energy efficiency and using their HVAC skills in a little bit of a different way, which is mostly working in companies that do air source heat pumps. So the fact that we're based right at the community and that we're a trusted partner really assisted in the recruitment process. And then we also have been a training resource. And I mentioned that we do technical training, and that really is the main work that we do. But in this particular partnership, we were really doing more in the way of job readiness and coaching and providing a peer support network. And I think that the job readiness boot camp that we did last summer was really important because we wanted to make sure that our interns felt like a cohesive group that could support each other. And so we spent a week together, first talking about and understanding for each individual what their skills were, what they were going to be bringing to the employer, what their strengths were, and then looking at how they would be presenting themselves to employers, working on resumes, interview skills, and then also getting to know who their employers were going to be, researching the employers, and even going over the employee handbook so that they could understand their rights and responsibilities on the job. And then we did do a lot of different exercises and workshops on issues such as problem solving, addressing obstacles, communication skills, teamwork, dependability, professionalism. And lastly, we talked about clean energy careers and what their goals were in that area. You can see there's a picture of the group on the slide, right as we were getting ready to go on to the next step, which was employment. But I should mention before we talk about employer referrals, the importance of coaching and the peer support network. We do have a job retention coach. Both Ruth and Amanda mentioned the fact that there is really a 9-month period when they're being accompanied by a coach. And that has been just super important because first, the group knows each other already. But the fact that the coach is in touch with them on a weekly basis, both by phone calls, group chats, Zoom meetings, and to really be working things out and anything that comes up on the job. You know, for example, during the first week, one of the interns was having an issue getting to work on time. And so the coach was talking to him about what was going on. And the fact that our coach is from Lawrence as well, the intern told her, oh, well, the problem is that there is a traffic jam and I'm trying to get there on time, but there's a terrible traffic jam and I can never get there on time. And so just talking about the fact that there were other routes to drive to work was really helpful to the intern to then be able to get to work on time. So just all those little obstacles that come up along the way, the coach is there to provide assistance. And we also have been assisting with employer referrals, connecting with employers, having employers come during our job readiness week. And the employers who are part of the program are ones who are really in HVAC only focusing on air source heat pumps and geothermal, which has been really exciting for our students, our interns as well. So we're now at the point where the interns have been working about a month and a half. Everyone is still employed, and it's really been a great experience where I think that as a technical school, we had the relationship previously with our students. 3 of them were high school student graduates and 3 were from an adult program that we just finished on HVAC. So we have that resource. We're embedded in the community. We have relationships with employers, and we have the staff here on site already that's capable of providing this job, the job coach role. So that I think that as you're thinking about who can assist in your inclusive workforce development programs, it's really good to be looking at local technical schools and see how they can help. So Amanda and Ruth, I'm not sure what the next slide is here.
Thank you again for that, Susan. I I feel like you do such a good job describing your experience in the program and the experience that young adults have in this program. PAs have spent quite a bit of time being really intentional around the design. I know you were one of the very first partners we spoke to when we said, hey, we have this new pilot. We'd really like to hear your input and your thoughts. And it's so great to see how when you work with local partners and you integrate like that, how you can create real shifts and access. And so what we wanted to
But
do
you
to
know,
kind
Ruth,
of
let me just add that I think at the same time how important it is to have this larger structure. Hold on a minute, we're in a school. We have the intercom is talking here. Okay, there we go. How important it is to have the broader structure and the support of the program administrators of the Mass Save program, as well as the lead vendor. You know, this was a pilot, and this is the first time we've all been through this. So we've had a few bumps along the way, but we've worked them all out because the structure was so well thought through from the start. So I think that it is really important to have all partners in the program because everybody's doing a different piece and really contributing with their strengths.
Thank you for that, Susan. And I think that speaks to the approach around the program, around, you know, being clear around what these individuals that are in the program, the type of support that they're going to actually need, not assuming that giving them an internship is going to mean they're going to be successful, paying them throughout the time is going to retain them, really thinking about if an individual, and it's not to assume that every individual in the program comes from communities that have a large percentage of poverty or a lower income, but we do have a good half of that population where that is very much true. And when an individual has faced systemic poverty for more than, let's say, 10 years of their life, it's going to have serious impacts on their development. And so we wanted to make sure as a part of this program, there were wraparound resources that can help the individual be successful. And so we wanted to share this as just for those who are considering standing up a program similar to this, just components of it to think about. One, to consider incorporating. One, you know, research and evaluate the workforce. Before you stand up a program, you want to make sure you have a baseline. I think Amanda and I spent quite a bit of time discussing the research that we utilize to create the structure that Susan is referring to now. You want to set realistic budget. I can't describe how important that is. When you're working with certain populations, they are going to require, especially those we coin sometimes as hard to reach, they're going to need more resources because they often been resource deprived for so long. You're going to also want to identify trained and skilled program staff. We've seen programs where individuals who have a somewhat of an understanding what workforce development is, and they work to just quickly stand something up, and that's just not going to work. You really have to be intentional with this population, especially with individuals who have not been engaged in your workforce. They can easily walk away because they don't have a reason to stay. There's no skin in the game. There's not connected to their communities. They may not be connected to anything that they're accustomed to. So they're like, you know what? I've experienced so much discomfort that I'm just not going to stay. You also want to be innovative and build D&I as goals into your program. And the reason that is so important is so that individuals are aware around, are clear around how their diversity is actually added value to the work. And a part of this program we did is we required that our business partners complete D&I training and the recruits participants who are in the program. So both of them were learning the structure and the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You want to build partnerships to create inclusion and reduce duplicate efforts in the workforce. And by that, we mean there's no reason for us as PAs to design a whole recruitment method where we are sending our staff to go and recruit individuals into the workforce. And we have partners like Susan, who already are doing that. They're doing it really well. And what they also are looking for opportunities for job placements and the opportunities for interns to receive hands-on experience. So you want to look at the ecosystem and see what is your value proposition, where you have gaps, who's already doing that work, and how can you bring them in as a partner in a way that's inclusive. You want to build pathways by designing workforce and internship programs with place-based approaches to reach new talent, especially for those who are coming in with transferable skills. And for those who are not familiar with place-based approach, it means you want to meet people where they are at. You want to be honest about their barriers. You want to think about supports and resources to help them overcome those barriers so that you can reach your goals and they can also service the individuals that are part of their mission. You want to include professional development of wraparound resources. We saw this as program administrators key to the success, that we wanted them, yes, to start as HVAC specialists, but we also wanted them to one day pathway into starting their own companies. We wanted them to, yes, start in weatherization, but then say, maybe you want to move out of installation, you want to become a crew chief and then start your own. We want them to know that there are so many different options. They could go back to school, become an engineer, become an electrician, whatever it may be. We want to keep them within the industry, and that does require that we are exposing them to individuals that are within the ecosystem, that are connected to a host of different opportunities, so they can explore. And we want to provide those wraparound resources to sustain and address their needs that may be outside of workforce. We want to, I mentioned again, build a place-based program model. So, for example, for Greater Lawrence, is we're working with a technical high school, but for another one of our partners is the Asian American Civic Association. They work with, they have a workforce development program, so they're not a high school. Then we had a third partner, which was a local workforce community-based organization. So they were all three different types of partners, all within workforce, different strategies of how they engage. We tried our best to meet them where they were at. And then, of course, you want to survey your program participants. We are going to be doing that with all of the partners that are part of this, because we want that information to inform program design, and we set metrics. So this isn't just, hey, we want to place 120 people in the workforce over 3 years and we want to retain them. We also want to know how well are they still in the industry a year after. We want to know what was their experience with the trainings. Like, did they feel like the hands-on training worked? Did they feel like the experiences that they had with the partners were fruitful? Do they feel like they received enough training to be successful? So we set array of metrics to quantify our success, from the amount of partners we brought in, the individuals that we placed, how long they stayed in the program, and their skills that they learned. And so through that, our goal was to measure the success of our program, so that we can know if this is a pilot that we can continue to scale. And of course, we want to continue to evaluate and report program outcomes to our external stakeholders and individuals, and such as yourself, so that we can create a model that allows more individuals, regardless of what their zip code is, to have access into the workforce. Next slide. So this is just an appendix that we will be sharing, I would believe, that has a lot of the evaluations and the research that Amanda and I have been speaking to throughout this entire presentation. Now we open up the floor for questions.
Great, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Susan, Ruth, and Amanda. I certainly really enjoyed the presentation a lot. So as Ruth said, we are now going to open it up for Q&A. So we have about 10 minutes or so for folks. If you want to come off mute, please feel free to do so and direct your question to any of the speakers or to all of the speakers. Also, I would encourage you guys to place your questions in the chat, and then I can relate that to them as well. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any questions. Let me stop sharing.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Delmar. I had two kind of related questions, and this is awesome work and great job. So I just wanted to start with that. Many of the questions that I had, you answered as you went through. My two core questions were, what are how do labor unions kind of tie into this conversation? And then I was also really interested in some of the retention approaches and metrics, and if that information is shareable. And then the last thing was, I don't know if it's possible to put the slide, your last appendix slide up. I was trying to get a screenshot of the appendix reference you had before it went away. But those are my two questions around labor unions and also just retention metrics and approach.
So I will try my best to speak to two of these, and Amanda, please chime in. She and I do quite a bit of this work together. For the current role, the current pathways, the individuals are being placed in non-union roles. So these roles are not currently connected to any unions. They are with our business, our small businesses and contractors that are, either we have a couple of like larger corporations, but then some of them are just smaller, shops. But we have definitely had discussions around what that would look like if we were to have that component of it. And I think for now, we're really focused on a local approach. We're really focused on making sure that this is place-based. And so, and even within that, there are barriers and challenges and that we're working to overcome as we kind of scale. And in addition to the retention, a part of the ways that we incorporated retention for some of it was financial, making sure that we pay them from day one. It's first day they're sitting in training, especially for the weatherization, that they're being paid for that. As we identify if somebody is lower income and they have other responsibilities, it doesn't matter if a job eventually will pay me $100,000. I'm not making that $100,000 right now, and I have real responsibilities, especially if they're immigrant. They may have responsibilities to parents. And as someone who's worked with immigrant youth in summer jobs, quite a bit of them were giving money to their families to keep their lights on, to pay food, rent. They weren't always keeping that money for themselves. So we were hypersensitive around making sure that they understood their time was valuable. And another way that we've identified retention outside of the payment is the wraparound resources, so that if they do have challenges and concerns while they are in the program, they have an organization that they trust, because they may not trust the utility company, they may not trust our lead vendor, but they're more than likely going to trust their community-based organization, and they're going to connect with them around the challenges that they're having. So those are some of the ways that we have tried to retain. And in addition to placing them with sites we know that have a need, that are seeking to employ. And also, I believe I mentioned this earlier, exposing them to other types of energy efficiency roles. So if they are in the role for 2 years and they're like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to do something else, that we can still keep them in the industry and they don't just leave clean energy and completely because they're not sure or they're not aware of what other opportunities are.
We're also providing diversity, equity, and inclusion training for both the employers and the interns themselves, so that they're kind of aware of the different challenges and aware of for the employers, aware of the opportunity and the importance of this work.
I'd just like to chime in too that, the technical school, we are unionized ourselves. And I have a long background in workforce development, public workforce development system, and we worked as closely as possible as we could with the unions, especially in the construction trades. But one issue that we have is that our region is about 45 minutes out of Boston. And most of the training facilities for the different unions are in Boston or, equivalent 45 minutes or an hour away. So that has limited union participation in our construction workers because it's hard to get the training, as well as many other reasons. But that has been a barrier. And retention strategies, we should also really talk about the professional development that's being offered. That's it. We've just started that. And at first, our interns were like, well, what is that? And why am I going to do this professional development? I don't get it. But I think that even after the first session, they now see that there is a reason and that they're going to be looking further ahead, not just on how to perfect their HVAC skills, but where else they can move and how they can be connected to clean energy, the clean energy ecosystem. So I think that that's also a really good retention strategy.
I have a question, if I can jump in. This is Chris Duffrin. I'm with Center for Energy and Environment in Minneapolis. And we're actually creating a program that looks almost exactly like yours. I feel like we've maybe been reading the same things. we're on a smaller scale and we're funded through Excel Energy here to do it. But same pathways, same structure in terms of the internship, the hands-on piece, as well as classroom training, partnering with community-based organizations, wraparound services, all these things. So I feel a little reassured that maybe we're putting together a design that's going to work. But one thing I'm curious about, because we've been grappling about this, is this training with employers? So I'm kind of thinking back to what Delmar was saying during his presentation, that the employers we're working with are, because the industry has been so dominated by white males, particularly in these trades, and they hire their sons and their nephews and their friends of their nephews. You know, that's their way they recruit. And now we're introducing this very diverse population to these employers. We're both thinking of the pathway of trying to help folks of color just create their own businesses around this so they can create more wealth as well. But also we think there's going to be this period where they're going to be training in with these employers. So could you talk more about the kind of training you're thinking about with the employers so that they become more inclusive in their work environments, and we can make sure we have good retention with these employers? Any insight on that would be helpful, because we're starting to think a lot about that.
First, I want to say, Chris, applaud you on thinking about the wealth building component of that, because that's real systemic shift, right? That's not to say the work that we're doing isn't real, but when you're building that level of economic wealth in a community, it's generationally, it changes someone's life. So definitely want to applaud you there. In regards to the training that we're doing with employers, I am going to be honest, it is not easy. Individuals have been doing this work the way they've been doing it for who knows how long, and adaptive change is never easy for individuals. So getting our contractors on board around, these are the young adults, this is the work that they're doing, and this is the professional development that we're going to be adding. They have to walk away from the work at least once a week. All of that took training, and telling them that you have to identify someone that's going to also shadow them. We didn't speak of this too, that will also shadow them and make sure that they're being onboarded comfortably into the role for 9 months is also got to be a part of that. And even within the diversity, equity, and inclusion training that we did, that was part of it, so that they are not, because when you bring in diverse populations into spaces that are highly populated by one particular group, regardless of what race that is, there's a culture shock for that individual that is in the program and the individuals that they have to work with them, because they're not comfortable, they're not aware around like certain social or cultural things, and so there's this level of discomfort. And so that's why we wanted to do the diversity inclusion training, to educate these contractors around what it means to work with diverse applicants and why it's important that they do that. Because to your point, while they have traditionally been sourcing talent, through their own network, that's just no longer successful. And that's just it's not something that's sustainable. And we have to make sure that we're saying that, because I think depending on the individual, they struggle and they battle with that and believing, no, I'm going to find someone. It's 2021, and the way you advertise jobs is through word of mouth. There's no way that that's sustainable. And so that's a part of that challenge. And I think the way that we are also pairing that with also providing the young adults with D&I training, because there's this misunderstanding that because a person comes from a diverse background, that they understand diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's so not true. You have to actually be trained and skilled at this work to be able to articulate it, teach it, and apply it. And so we did that for young adults, so that when they were in their space, they felt empowered to know that they add real value to the workforce, that they are increasing access to energy efficiency in their communities, and that their specific experiences can help innovate the way that we do our work. And it might also help us be more efficient with the way that we do our work when we bring in a different population, because we're seeing from a different perspective. And I think if there's a real value proposition to educating both parties on that level, and really then giving them the space to influence both of those spaces. So we didn't want young adults to feel like, well, this is just another job, I'm just being hired for this role. We wanted them to feel empowered in this, especially with the amount of new entry jobs we're going to need in the workforce of the next close to 10 or more years to really reach the goals around energy efficiency.
If I can just build a little bit on what Ruth is saying too, it's important to have a really strong feedback loop, communication loop. So the training was delivered, firstly, both of the trainings are delivered by staff from National Grid who work on DEI full time. So having leadership from one of the PA sponsors was really important to like kind of set the bar for the contractors, that we're setting an example ourselves. Then we've been working, Ruth and I have been working to make sure that there's staff with our implementation vendor who has relevant HR experience to be able to handle, like if one of the interns feels uncomfortable for whatever reason, we don't want to get it, we want to know about that right away. So be able to have somebody on the implementation team, as well as be able to have interns come directly to the community partner that they're working with. If there's through their weekly meetings with them, if there's anything that might pop up. Likewise, like making sure that we have active communication with the contractors to be reinforcing these messages, that it's not just a one-time thing, is really important too. And then in the long term, making sure that we're creating like leaving our contractor partners with active information about how they like helping them to attract candidates on an ongoing basis. So actively connecting them with candidates, connecting them with training organizations so that they're relying less on word of mouth. So making sure just everybody stays connected and communicating to avoid potential issues or potential issues.
Great.
Roxanne,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to ask one question, but first I wanted to see if anyone in the audience had a question before I jumped in. Okay, my question has to do with policy. I know some folks in the audience work on policy as well as, implementation of programs. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the role of local governments or state governments in scaling these types of efforts, better supporting these types of efforts. Just curious what thought you've given that and recommendations you have for us listening today. Thank you.
I would say one of the recommendations, and I'm probably going to think of our Community First Math program, is increasing education around energy efficiency for local governments. And by that, I mean through programs that involve families, programs that involve renters and landlords, raising awareness around that. I would say too, part of it is also looking at zoning and codes around energy efficiency in homes and giving renters more of a stake and ability to engage in energy efficiency. While that may seem like it's more about engagement in our energy efficiency programs, it's not just that, it's also the workforce. And if you're not exposed to these things, these terms, and you don't understand that you can have access to them, it's really hard to make them tangible. And so I would say recently, I know Amanda and I joined a Green Jobs Advisory Board for the city of Boston, and it was around working with that local municipality to think through what types of jobs are available in energy efficiency and clean energy. And as utilities, we were able to provide so much insight around what jobs were available, type of skills you would need to help them craft out language for an RFP they were going to be releasing. And through that, we advocated that this funding go to community-based organizations that are focused on workforce, because that's one of the best ways to get to increase access is through current infrastructure, and sometimes it's not creating new. So I think if towns have the openness to learn and engage actively using their current resources and infrastructure, it goes a long way to think about it through the lens of workforce, but also through the lens of increasing energy efficiency in their buildings of their residents and their renters, well, their renters and their landlords. I think those are a couple of ways.
And we're seeing Massachusetts, I think this was also similar in your presentation, Delmar, like that Illinois mandated funding, and Massachusetts recently, we've been doing funding on our own through ratepayer dollars, but it's certainly increased with the new funding that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has us granting to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and they're a quasi-governmental entity. And so now we're also sitting on an advisory board to advise how that funding is going to be distributed and the different programming. We've provided ideas to them. So the municipalities and state agencies, in addition to kind of helping to convene resources for this kind of work, can also be conveners of the different stakeholders that should be coming together, like the training organizations, the employers, us like utilities and the different entities.
And Amanda, just to kind of piggyback on that, one of the things that kind of cascades through both the state as well as like, we do a lot of work through Cook County, which is a really large county that Chicago is basically in. And they're a really big source of projects. So to Ruth's point, they have a pretty critical role in education communication. I think where it starts to turn into an interesting discussion, which is why I asked the question around organized labor, is a lot of the money that either cascades from the feds through the state to the local usually has some sort of requirement around project labor agreements or other things that necessitate some coordination with labor. So there's still a learning curve that we're going through because labor has had a history of not necessarily working well with communities of color, especially in Illinois. So there's a little bit of balancing act there as they're getting, as they're diversifying their practices and communities are starting to get more comfortable trying to figure out how do we engage them, but also train people at the grassroots level has been something we've been thinking through.
You're also making me think about supplier diversity, which has been a big topic too, that state and local government has a really critical role in setting the standard for around supplier diversity and providing resources to make sure that companies have an easy access to the certification for that as well.
Alrighty, well, so we have time for just one last question. If anyone wants to come off mute, ask their question. If not, I can ask a question that I'm curious about. Maybe I think this might be a question for Susan. You talked a little bit about coaching / mentorship, and I find that to be incredibly powerful and impactful. And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the mentors are recruited for students, and like, have you seen after your first cohort, do these mentors continue to work with students after they complete their training program?
So in the case of Greater Lawrence Technical School, our mentor is, we're just getting off the ground. This is our very first mentor. But the thing is, in our school, we have a lot of people who are paraprofessionals who support our teaching staff and support our diverse population in maybe language barriers, academic barriers. So we have a lot of a staff to recruit from. And so we already have the staff here who's, their job during the school year is to be working with our students and also our adult students. For example, our adult students, we have a bilingual manufacturing program. So we've already developed, a lot of materials on vocabulary and concepts in advanced manufacturing. So our paraprofessionals who are in EL are really great resources to also be supports and to have that be part of the peer network for our students and then our interns. So that's the source of our coaches. I would like to see us have more formalized training for our coaches. It's something that would probably be a good idea. They do have a lot of experience here with professional development, but that's really more around working with high school students. So looking at more the coaching for, job retention and things like that.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, that will conclude this portion of our agenda. We will now segue to a small break, that a 5-minute break. That will start, I guess, it's 4:25 here in Eastern Coast. So I would say let's try to be back by 4:30 p.m. So that when we do come back, we can start our next activity of the workshop. But feel free, yeah, we will resume at 4:30. Hello, everyone. Is everyone coming back? Alrighty. Well, I'm gonna assume that we're all back. And before prior to switching to our next activity, I forgot to thank the presenters. Ruth, Amanda, and Susan, thank you so much for a really wonderful presentation. I think the Clean Energy Pathway program is really awesome, and I'm really excited to see the successes that it will have in the near future over the course of the 3 years. Well, once again, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your break. We are now shifting a little bit our next activity. So we created a couple questions for the group. Let me share my screen real quick. Are you guys? Oh. So for our next activity, we will now engage in 2 breakout groups. So originally we were gonna have 5 breakout rooms, but we are now gonna shift it a little bit to 2 breakout groups. And what we have is a few questions for the group that we would like for you all to discuss. These questions really explore at existing workforce development programs and help you identify opportunities in your communities to strengthen an inclusive workforce, energy efficiency workforce. So we also want to hold some time during these breakout rooms for you to identify some next steps and discuss any unanswered questions that you may still have. So like I said, for this activity, we will break out into 2 groups. So I will be a facilitator with the support of Ruth, and then for the other group, it will be Lauren and Amanda. And I will now stop sharing my screen and open up the groups. We will have about 15 minutes, so we will return for around 4:45. So you should receive an invitation now to join the group. Feel free to join now.
Hey folks, welcome back from your breakout rooms. Hope the conversations were useful. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but did want to just take a chance to talk through a few things with the groups and at least maybe share a little bit of a report out of how your conversations went. I was the note taker in the first session, so I can jump in, Roxana, if that would be okay. All right. We talked a little bit about, just some of the few things that were going on from an energy efficiency workforce perspective, just to talk through some things, just to help, provide some additional context there. We've been really blessed to be able to have some really great examples. We talked really briefly about some of the work that NYSERDA is doing on some clean energy and energy efficiency workforce and internship issues. One of the participants that we had join us is trying to work in a startup capacity to try to actually focus on the kind of areas that we've been talking about today, which I think is still a work in progress, but is interesting to start thinking about how more people are getting interested in being able to support the space. And also heard a little bit from about a program from Entergy in New Orleans that's called a Green Corps, which works on internship placement, and I've done a poor job of fully typing this, and then also connecting with contractor and aligned services. So, a few things that are just in the space that certainly seemed useful for people to start getting more familiar with, or just experiment for things that might be more in the region. In terms of some of the other pieces that we talked about, there certainly was, this a discussion about the overall tension, I guess, or the overall demand for HVAC services in general, and trying to figure out, meeting that demand with workforce in general, but then also figuring out where, potential opportunities for employment might be, and trying to link them where they are. There was a fair bit of a discussion about where online learning can play into some of these issues, especially at a more foundational level, and then being able to bring that into a more applicational perspective. And there's a lot of different, I think an evolving discussion, and I think it's been raised a few times in our conversation to date about, how some of these partnerships and collaboration can work with or without unions and other service providers to be able to deliver training and services. And it certainly sounds like there's a lot of discussion and interest in figuring out the ways to partner with union labor in various different ways, and trying to figure out how to make some of these linkages work, but making sure that there's an understanding that sometimes that always isn't necessarily, as we've I think heard from Delmar and others, not always necessarily the easiest to align in some of that process. So finally, just really briefly, we had talked a little bit about where we take some of this and move it in the to deal with the support in the future. I think a number of folks were really struck and I think taken by the thoughts about being able to provide DEI training for firms that are entering into that process, but also for trainees. I guess I would say for myself, I didn't enter into the conversation, but certainly agree that making sure that everybody's on board and thinking about this from people who are in all parts of the work stream make a lot of sense. And then thinking about how the wraparound services are going to be necessary to reach diverse populations. And I think we've some of the discussion happened a little bit already, but certainly I think that's been something that I think people are going to take away from the conversation of figuring out that it's not easy to reach all populations, and figuring out how to support and provide different mechanisms for those things to be able to get more people into the employment and workforce pipeline as necessary. So a really good conversation. I know we're a little short on time, but certainly appreciate everybody's contribution to the discussion, and look forward to talking again further in the future about some of these things. Roxana, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Just like in our group, we had really great conversation too. And thank you to the people in my group for sharing, Ruth for taking notes. Similar to the first question, we sort of talked about some of the examples are, well, kind of a comment that was brought up is that often retention is overlooked. And, how do we make sure that when we are creating these workforce development programs, we are also providing trainees with the resources and tools they need to feel safe, especially in systems that not necessarily might be serving them or weren't built to serve them. Another thing is focusing on recruiting. So recruiting contractors who focused on hiring people of color or women locally, so that they mirror the communities that they would be serving. So sort of the ComEd has a utility supplier diversity program in Illinois that they do to help contractors through their services. And then for the next question, we sort of have a good discussion of like, what are opportunities that exist? And that would be to expand the training infrastructure. So looking at ways to increase access to employment, and also to like foster local and coordination to really expand these job opportunities so that young adults are exposed to them early on in their career, like in high school or middle school or just in their academia. So yeah, again, an emphasis on larger regional coordination around green jobs. And another thing that emerged from our conversation was the theme of collaborations and in using some of the partners in our communities already. So for example, one partner was, having an emphasis on technical schools. Most of the people in these technical schools already have licenses and are well set up to do technical training. So it's a matter of like not reinventing the wheel, but really using the resources and organizations that we already have available. We talked a little bit about some of the barriers that some folks are experiencing in their communities. Biggest one, being funding. So how can federal and state level commit to this work and provide funding so that cities and CBOs are able to really deliver and develop these programs, and also emphasizing on accountability and transparency amongst these organizations. And then the last key takeaway here is some of the next steps that some folks talked about, is ensuring that different departments and utilities really are looking to establish meaningful and authentic partnerships with organizations in these communities, and that these organizations are working to connect with individuals looking for green jobs or just interested in learning about energy efficiency. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I know we have 2 minutes left in our workshop, but I just want to take the time to thank everyone for joining us today for our workshop, and thank our wonderful speakers, Delmar, Susan, Ruth, and Amanda, for your presentation as well. We really appreciate having you on this team, and thank you for taking the time to joining us. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope that folks here also did too, and hopefully we see more programs like the Clean Energy Pathway emerge in different communities. So please feel free to, if you guys are comfortable, to share your information in the chat with folks.
Can I add something, Roxanne, if you don't mind, for those who are still here? If you're interested in these programs and you are, and it feels like it's a lot of information and you can easily become overwhelmed, one of the things I want to say, it's worth it. When you see the young adults who go through this program and it creates real opportunities and it changes their life, it's really worth it. When it reduces their, it helps us as a state decarbonize, it's worth it. And so I just really want to empower and individuals to see it as that these jobs and these opportunities can really change an individual's exposure to so many other things in life. And so it may seem like it's a lot at the very beginning, but it's definitely worth it to these communities that we serve.
Thank you, Ruth, for sharing that. I appreciate it. So we're just at the time at 5 p.m. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know here in DC it's 5 p.m. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the speakers. And I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your day in the conference.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Roxana, for organizing. Take care. Bye.